pressure to get that success. I'd just like to acknowledge we've just been joined by Keith Bradby, CEO of Gondwana Link, one of the giants on whose shoulders we stand. And also looks like Joe Woodbridge from State NRM. So we acknowledge State NRM and our other funding body, the NLN. I'd also like to acknowledge that we all stand on this beautiful country that's been preserved for thousands of years by the traditional custodians. Done an amazing job, and we like to learn as much as we can from them and exchange our skills and our commitment to the landscape. We acknowledge the elders, past and present. Okay, the session will be recorded, as you've just noticed. If you can rename, you might have something a bit kooky on your naming there. If you can change that so we know who you are, so Kate can see who's joined us, and make sure you all get your follow-up emails and any materials that we share afterwards with the audience. Our facilitators today. Oh, just one more thing too. If you can put what country you're on in the chat, if you know what nation and what country you're coming from around the state, that would be great. And at some point, when we're all in, going to ask you to put your cameras on so we do a quick screenshot. And that's part of our evidence for reporting to our funding bodies. So thank you for that when the time comes. So Louise Turrier at the top of our screen is joining us from Carbon Positive Australia. Louise is the CEO there. Welcome, Louise, and thank you.
Thank you.
Bruce Ivers is the Director of Trees Australia. He's joined us to share his knowledge and wisdom from many years today. Bruce, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jack. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I see that Melinda's overcome her technical problems, and she's just joined us from Greening Australia, the conservation biologist there. Thank you, Melinda.
Oh, apologies for that. Always inopportune times.
It always happens, doesn't it?
It does.
That's fine. So we've got a lovely diversity of people here from around the state today for this hot topic. And I know you've just joined us, Melinda, but you're actually first on the list to kick off and to share with us your thinking on revegetation, how to get success in a drying climate from Greening Australia and your own perspective.
Yeah, sure thing. Great, thanks for that. I mean, I was wondering whether, because I know that it's more informal. I'm happy to chat. I did have a couple of slides, but I thought might actually just help the process. So because everything is just restarted, is it possible that somebody else goes first and then I can jump in second? Is that possible?
Of course.
Sorry, just so I get myself back on.
No, okay. I should have thought of that myself, Melinda, no problem. Louise, would you like to kick off?
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thank you very much for having me here to chat today. I also want to pay my respects to the Whadjuk Noongar people whose land I'm on today, and to recognise that the land was never ceded. And I couldn't think of a topic really that is more on my mind at the moment. To say that I'm faced with this as front and centre of my days at the moment would be an understatement. For those of you who aren't aware, Carbon Positive Australia is planting on land that's owned by Bush Heritage Australia, which is up just slightly north of Kalbarri, and so has a pretty minimal rainfall in normal circumstances. This year it looks like we're having a similar season to the one that we had back in 2019, and the rainfall is expected to, has so far been quite minimal, and we need at least 17 mils before the next few weeks, because we've mobilised to have hundreds of thousands of seedlings to go into the ground, and we've changed the area that we're planting from what is the sort of more nutrient-rich red soils over to the sand plain this year as well. So as I said, to say this is a topic close to my mind, I'm actually trying to do a little rain dance most days at the moment, which is quite amusing to see me in my back garden doing that. But anyway, I don't have any slides because I wanted to sort of talk to this more in the sense of, you know, what are we thinking about strategically, first of all, then how that kind of is coming down into sort of the operational choices that we're making. And then what are some of the things that we are faced with? And then what are we doing about it? And look, what we're doing about it might not be what everybody else will do about it. You know, you may have lots of different choices. You know, you may even think that some of the choices that we're making aren't the right ones, you know. But I think for me, this was an opportunity to start to have, as Jack said at the beginning, some really frank conversations about a subject that is just going to, I think, you know, get more problematic as the years go by and as we sort of move into this climate situation that we're in. You know, the reality is a lot of the work that we're doing is, you know, to help with climate, and yet, you know, we're suffering from the impacts. So I think at a sort of strategic level, we've sort of broken the problem down into sort of three areas. One is risks. So what are the risks, you know, that we're actually faced with in a drying climate, and what are the financial risks of that? What are the risks of projects that we've already planted and their potential success rates into the future? What are the risks in terms of, you know, the overall landscape here? And so that's one of the areas. The second is complexity. It's making the task of planting far more complex than it has been, particularly even just in terms of, you know, mobilization. If you're waiting for rain to come and rain's not coming, and you've got people to mobilize, people to find accommodation for out on site, particularly if you're doing bigger plantings. But also, you know, if you're just doing day plantings in places, you know, you've got all these mobilization risks going on. And we're having to learn as an organization how to be a lot more flexible around that. You know, how can we build flexibility into our plans? So I suppose, you know, if you break it down to the operational sort of next level, we're looking at obviously plant survival rates, our ability to deliver projects. So where we can successfully deliver a project is obviously high on that list of items. You know, will what we do, I mean, particularly as a carbon planting organization, I mean, we're primarily restoration, but we measure carbon, you know, will the growth rates that we have in particular areas actually meet those requirements for carbon? Then looking at lifetime planting. So it might be a successful planting now, but is it going to be successful in 12 years time? Is it going to be successful in 25 years time? All of those kind of questions that are bubbling around, and particularly issues around, you know, how much biodiversity you can get into a planting, and, you know, the dangers associated, and we don't do monoculture plantings, but, you know, the dangers associated around monocultures as well. So just to say, you know, I suppose in a nutshell, projects are becoming much higher risk, they're becoming far more complex, and we're having to be a lot more flexible on the ground. So what are we doing about it, I suppose, more importantly? So what's our plan in the midst of this, you know, problem? So for us, obviously, one of the main things, we decided to not go down the climate ready approach at this stage. We are very much still looking at local provenance. We're actually, in our community plantings that we're doing a couple of sort of trial plantings around climate ready. We want to just kind of have an understanding of what those means. But in terms of our own planting projects, we've made the decision at this point to remain with local provenance. What we're doing as a result of that is trying to constantly increase biodiversity. So trying to get as many different species and types of plants into the mix as we can. That's adding cost, of course. And again, it's also adding complexity in terms of working with nurseries. I can tell, you know, we've got some fantastic nurseries in WA. But when you're asking them to grow small quantities of, you know, plants that haven't been germinated that often and grown, you'll face, you know, there's often less appetite for that, because obviously commercially that's, you know, it's quite a distinct kind of issue. So provenance is definitely something that's high up there and that we're thinking about. The next thing is obviously water harvesting and management. So preparation in terms of water harvesting is becoming increasingly necessary, which again is adding to site preparation costs, because, you know, we're having to go over a number of times rather than just the once or twice. Techniques, particularly techniques around weed control and soil management. Some of the technical methodologies and the way that we're planting. All of these things require more knowledge. You know, we're in the process of trying to design different bits of equipment that can potentially help with that. Also, seed collection knowledge, I think, is something that we're really focusing on. And in terms of, you know, then looking at what the potentials are for direct seeding as opposed to just planting with seedlings. And then the one thing, I mean, there's a lot around there, and I'm quite happy to answer questions kind of in that, but there's a lot in that mix. So let's just put it into the bucket of techniques and, you know, and thoughts around how to do things differently. I think the two final things that I'd actually really like to bring up is monitoring. So a lot of the work that we do, we monitor far more in excess than would be required by some of the sort of carbon types of methodologies. And actually, I think monitoring is going to be one of the key things that we need to be doing. And one of the things, and it's great that you've got some funders here as well, because one of the things that we're hearing from a lot of the community groups is there's money to do the planting, but there's not money to do the monitoring afterwards. And I think, and our team thinks that monitoring and having the funding available to do longer term and scale monitoring is going to be crucial as part of this discussion, because we need to have the science on the ground of, you know, how this is playing out for us, because it's not playing out evenly in each different area. You know, we've got some areas where actually there's more water, some areas where there's less. So, you know, we've got a changing climate as opposed to it just being about drying. And then I suppose just to finish up, I would say collaboration is going to be key. So working together, sharing knowledge, and actually being able to tell the truth when things are not going the way that we want them to go, and to have safe spaces where that's possible, because, you know, these projects are costing thousands and thousands of dollars and no one wants to admit to failure. But I think we're going to have to, you know, all get a little bit more open about what works and what hasn't worked, and share that knowledge in order for us as a, you know, as a community to get better results. So yeah, that's my kind of take on things at the moment, and I hope that was helpful to the audience.
That's wonderful, Louise. I've been madly trying to capture some of that so we can come back to it, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions from the floor. We were talking before we started the session about this being a safe space where people can talk about their fear of failure, their concerns about failure. We could tap into State NRM, to Joe, who's here with us today, and say, you know, and one of the things that they say to me is that they're interested to hear about failure. Failure is where we learn. And I think we're at a critical point where we do have to really have those conversations that once upon a time we might have been too embarrassed to talk about what's working and what's not, because we're all under the same pressure. We're all in this for the same reason, to try to do this climate mitigation. Any direct questions for Louise? There will be question time at the end as well. I'll just skip across the screen and see if there's any hands up at this point. No? Great, thank you, Louise. I'm going to take over to Bruce now, Melinda. I've just changed the sequence again, sorry to do that, but given Bruce's approach with the school kids, I think before you joined, Bruce, Louise said to me, Bruce is the sort of person that I'd like to see a great big bronze statue made for, because of the work that he does with school kids and the amount of trees he's planted. And congratulations on all of that. You're doing a wonderful job. And listening to Louise and the depth of what she was talking about, what's your response there, Bruce?
Jack, thanks for that. I am trying desperately to find out how to share my screen with you. So I can't hear you, Jack.
Go down to the bottom of your
Yeah.
screen. There should
Yep.
be a bright green square with an arrow that says share
Yes.
screen.
Yep.
It'll show you all your different documents and you choose the one that you want to share.
Good God, it's not there.
Oh, okay. Well, what were you going to share with us?
It was a PowerPoint about which shows photographs of some of the issues that I've run into with poor quality seedlings from nurseries. So it's not something I can talk to. I need to actually show the photos. But
okay. Try emailing it through to me. It might be a little bit large if there's a number of photographs there.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Can somebody tell me how to find it? Because I don't. When I open this, it doesn't take me anywhere near.
I tell you what we will do, Bruce.
Yeah.
We'll get Casey to ring you behind the scenes.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
And give you a hand. And we will very flexibly, because we're highly adaptable in Landcare, we'll throw to Melinda, sorry.
Yeah, no problems at all. No, this is good. All the technical problems all over the place. But yeah, we'll do our best. We'll see if that works for me. Well, thanks very much for the opportunity to be here today to talk to the group here. It's very, very pressing and something that we're all really in the midst of dealing with. I'd just like to also just start by saying, paying my respects that are coming from Whadjuk Noongar country here, and just really want to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and really pay my respects to how they have cared for the land and thought about their interactions with seed and sourcing and what outcomes we want on the ground. And it's been yeah, really great to be here on Swan Coastal Plain and really think about that context for this discussion about, you know, past, where we are right now and where we're heading into the future. I mean, and I guess it's sort of one of those things that's quite reflective, and it's something that I sort of think about often here, is that, I mean, what we're dealing with in these sort of times of drying climates, but even more broadly, is like with revegetation and restoration. When you think about how nature does things, I mean, nature doesn't recruit every year. Like, it's sort of more sporadic recruitment. Things happen when the time is right and the conditions are right. And here, because of our projects and because of our deadlines and because of what we're trying to do in our commitment, we are trying to do this every year. So in some ways, we're starting out possibly trying to get things established in a year in which nature might not necessarily have done that. And so we are starting from a position that's hard. And I think it's good just to recognize that at the beginning and going, well, failure, we've all had failures, and then there's obviously things and steps that we can take, and we can think about our risks at the end of the day. But we are fighting an uphill battle, and it's a battle that's worth fighting, of course, because we want to have all these outcomes on the ground, but that we are starting from a place that's challenging, and just recognizing that and thinking about that, I think, gives us a bit of that open, that safe space to say, this is hard. Well, how can we actually move forward? So we'll share a couple of slides in a minute, but I think it was also thinking about this. I mean, I'm a geneticist and an ecologist by training, so my world often is thinking down to the genetics. So I thought today, if we've only got a few minutes, and of course this is a discussion that we could have for hours, and it needs to have that. So rather than sort of pushing any kind of a way forward, I just thought it might be worth just talking a little bit about the science behind, well, how might we approach this from a seed sourcing perspective, from a genetics? Because I mean, I love the fact that we've all probably done this. We've all held some seed in our hand and looked at that and think that's amazing. Like, that is the whole program for that plant's life, is sitting there in the seed that's then either going to go to the nursery and produce a seedling, or it's going to go in the ground via direct seeding. It's pretty exciting to think about that, the genetics that's going to determine how that plant performs right now in the conditions that we have, and then of course its contribution to that population when we think about the future. So I guess I was thinking about measuring success right now. Of course, we've got the immediate success of our programs, and our projects, which is utmost and foremost most important, but there's also this future perspective. Well, what are we actually setting up in terms of resilience and adaptation for the future? And knowing that some of the challenges that we're dealing with, when you look about the real life of the seasons that we've got right now, but then where its projections are going in the future, that we know that the planting window is going to get shorter, and that's hard. And that's some of the things, Louise, you were talking about mobilisation, the very practicalities of going when the time of the season is right. We know there's going to be less rainfall overall in that particular the core planting season we've got now, and it's going to be more variable. So how do we actually deal with that from a perspective of what we're putting in the ground? So of course, this is a big topic, and it's one that I'm definitely not going to cover everything for now, but I thought I might just start with a couple of just projections background. So can everybody see that? Is that okay? Is that in the slideshow mode?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so again, we've only got a few minutes. I just thought it'd be worth sort of going, okay, we've all done this. We've all said, okay, we've got our project, and our project is in a particular part of the landscape. I mean, how do we decide what provenances we choose, what composition we put in there? And as Louise brought up before, we've got to understand that for a species by species approach, and then obviously the community perspective about the biodiversity. So if we think about this illustration here of just different colours representing different population sizes and different environments that they might be in, we know that there's a few processes that determine kind of the genetic makeup of those source populations. The first one is what environment they're living in right now, and that's most of the time would produce a certain adaptive landscape for that population. So individuals in that population are more likely to be adapted to, say, hot or dry places if that's what they experience now and in the past, of course. And then there's those ones that might be in wetter, cooler. But that's obviously not the only thing that's going on for us when we're thinking about seed sourcing. It's obviously small populations which might be more inbred. So you've got more related individuals in that population, which means that the seed quality is not going to be as good because you have inbreeding effects. You might have less genetic diversity there, and you might have chance events that mean that that's just got less diversity to start with. And we think about genes moving between populations, and in sometimes genes moves across between populations a lot, in others they don't. And that also depends on landscape context and where you are as well. But this pushes up with this, well, where are we going to source then for this sourcing in a changing climate? And again, you know, Louise, you mentioned there's sort of climate ready restoration. That's one part of it. That'll be some of it that I'll talk about today. But I thought maybe it's worth just taking a step back and taking a few minutes to say, well, what should we be doing? What are some of the science behind the whys? Why would we do this if we're thinking about climate change? So I thought, again, without sort of overloading everybody with graphs, I thought, okay, if we had everybody on this call and we lined everybody up as we probably did when we were kids into human height. So we lined everybody up and we measured their height, and we said, okay, what we've got is you often end up with this a bell curve. So you'll have, and this is obviously this American graph here, but it shows the same thing. So we'll have people who are shorter, we'll have sort of the average people, average height who sits in the middle, and then we'll have the very tall people. And this is because human height is determined by a large number of genes across all our chromosomes. So that's called a polygenic or a quantitative genetics trait. And that just gives you an illustration of sort of a trait in humans. But if we think about plants and plant traits, there's a lot of plant traits that are exactly the same. So if you went out and you measured individuals in a population, you'd get the bell curve here. So one I might talk about in a minute is water use efficiency. So essentially this is how much photosynthesis a plant can do for a certain amount of water. So individuals who are of plants that are in a hotter and drier place, they usually need less water to do photosynthesis. If something's in wetter, cooler, they kind of need more water. But if we went into a population, we'd find a bell curve. We'd have a lot of individuals in the middle, and they would be mostly, you would think they'd be adapted to that particular climate and location, but you will have a spread. We'll have individuals down the bottom and individuals up the top. So if you went and seed sourced in one population, you might just go and select from across this bell curve, sift different parts of it, but you've only got the profile of that one population. But I thought it might be worth just taking a little bit step back to this science, because it's important to think about, well, what are we actually trying to achieve when we're looking at provenance and going and collecting seed from different populations, and then of course what that climate ready response is all about as well. So if we thought about what what needed from a genetics perspective for survival in, response to these drying conditions. If we look at our little bell curve here, and then we looked at this trait plant and we thought, okay, there's poor plants out there. It's hotter and drier. There's some that are definitely going to struggle. And those are the ones that are determined by this trait of water use efficiency. So if we had plants with low water use efficiency, it means that they just basically need a lot of water to do life and to do their photosynthesis. So they would have a low drought tolerance. Ones that have higher water use efficiency are pretty efficient at what they do. They don't actually need much water to photosynthesize, so they would be like the high drought tolerance. So basically, if we went to one population, then you would just be sourcing from this particular range. So what we're thinking of with climate ready approaches, the whole science behind that is, well, can we go to populations that are hotter and drier right now and try potentially and source some genetic variation here from so trying to get individuals and source individuals that potentially have a higher drought tolerance and are able to cope with hotter and drier conditions without swamping out that local variation. So we want to have the local, and definitely, but it's about bringing in this variation, trying to make a broader curve and bringing in that variation so that individuals have a better chance to deal with hotter and drier conditions. And so that's where we're thinking about, okay, this is what we're using this quantitative genetic approach to think about how we might do that. All populations that maybe have more variable climates, these are the ones that have all of the variation there, but the individuals that are currently there have to deal with that. And that's what we would be selecting for when we're going and doing that sort of climate ready approach, but knowing definitely that it's not about swamping, it's not going about doing all of that. And it's also having a risk framework behind where you would go and do that as well. So we thought just to take a step back again to think, well, what are the very practical implications of thinking about this? And this is something we work with and we contend with all our projects here at Greening Australia. And by no means have we got all this sorted out using the best available science. I would say the first and most foremost thing you could do in any project is sourced from multiple populations to capture that genetic variation or that genetic diversity, because that's going to give you the best chance of having individuals in there that can cope with what's happening now and what's going to happen in the future. So if we looked at this, you might say, okay, well, the middle one might be where your population is. You might go and get a few individuals from the wetter and cooler, but you might also source from the hotter and drier because you know there's individuals in there that can probably cope with that. But so you might consider a climate adjusted approach, but again, we're teasing with this and we don't apply it across the board because there's a risk assessment that has to go with that. And for some places that's not going to be appropriate, other with the higher conservation assets, but other places where it really clearly is. And the projections say we really need to go there because the risks of not doing that are too much. So I guess I just wanted to take a perspective for a minute just to say, well, what are we trying to do when we think about this from a genetics perspective? And the take-home messages being that genetic variation is going to be the basis of everything. So even if you decided to have a broader local region, making sure you've got multiple provenances in there to start with. If you're willing to go further afield and consider climate ready or climate adjusted approaches, you can be strategic about what you do that and then making sure that's only like a small proportion so that you're increasing that genetic variation without swamping out that the local population and that local genetic variation that you have. I think that's probably obviously so much more we can talk about, but I figure this is where questions can come in. It's sort of the first of many conversations, and really a big advocate if we're going to do this, we need to monitor and we need to check and we need to see what's actually happening. And that's a very core thing that whenever we do climate ready approaches, we would be monitoring those just to see what the outcomes are in the short term. And then of course, but thinking about a longer term perspective for that as well.
That's fabulous, Melinda. Thank you so much. Yes, I've been jotting things down and taking that in as much as possible and thinking that could I throw to Keith, if you're still here, just to get a bit of feedback, or Johnny, people who are doing lots of planting have over the time, to give us a sense of who's doing that approach. Is someone want to share that they're doing a climate adjustment approach and what they've learnt to date, just so we can ground some of the things that Melinda just spoke about. Don't have to put your hands up, just jump in, unmute and go.
You've dropped me in it, have you? Thanks, Jack. Well, I'm still digesting it too, but I think we're still wrestling with the intensity of the importance of local provenance in southwestern Australia. You know, if we're in Minnesota, I'd be a bit more inclined to what Melinda's saying. If I was in Eastern Australia dealing with species like yellow box, which has a range from southern Queensland through to Victoria, almost South Australia, I think. But, you know, we've recently been digging into that whole, the science behind why we have talked local provenance. And I think there's lots of very important points in that for southwestern Australia, where you have so much local endemism. But we're also been looking at some examples of people who, back in the heady days of plantings in the 80s and 90s, in one example, brought in Acacia saligna. They had Acacia saligna on the farm, but there was a great seed source about 30 kilometres away. That seed source has become a weed on the farm, whereas the local saligna isn't. So I hear what Melinda's saying. I'm just ultra cautious, and I think we need to be still. And I think you've got to mix in with that the fact that our ecosystems are amongst the toughest in the world, and I think they may well, if we pay a bit more attention to how they function ecologically and look after that side of things for the long haul, I think they might do better under climate change than we expect. I'm not ready to play God yet and move things around. And I just wanted to also comment on a point Louise made, that I guess I just need to recognise that we're working in one part of southwestern Australia where the drying climate will not be as extreme. And, you know, I think there's some really difficult big picture thinking for us all to have on what will work where in 100 years' time, let alone the establishment questions, which are the focus of today. Go on, Johnny, she was dropping you in there too.
No, there he is. Come on.
Oh, look. Yeah, I'm a bit like Keith, because there's so much in the way of mosaics in this landscape that we're working with, is bringing stuff from outside into those spots is can be quite detrimental. So yeah, I'm looking at those communities that have been identified and then going back to trying to replicate how the succession happens. And then I'm not afraid to plant earlier these days, because yeah, that warmth that's in the ground and the oncoming moisture, I try and take advantage of that and try and yeah, get the roots going as much as possible, especially the wetland stuff, so they develop their parenchyma and all the rest of the robustness to deal with the oncoming wet. Hopefully they'll establish a root system, having that warmer kind of soil temperature before the onset of rain and the cooler kind of temperature. But yes, somebody from the community just said, all right, so you're collecting this seed for this area, but and that area is in that time is right now. It's like it's had to go through so much succession to get to that point. How do we actually, how do we do the the putting in the primary succession species to help those areas that you're rehabilitating get to their end point. And to me, it's like when you look at a fire and you see what comes up in a fire, that kind of creates your species list for that succession. So that's where I'm at. I just kind of get guided by questions the community asks me of how do we get to a point, little steps.
Thanks, Johnny. Melinda, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, they're great points. And I guess, I mean, it's definitely, I think we have to be cautious. And if there's anywhere in the world that you need to be cautious, it's here, Southwest WA. I mean, and I guess how we approach things, there's definitely parts of Southwest WA that we would say, no, that's not appropriate here. It's, a high value conservation asset. We're just going to go locally, but try and get that maximum genetic diversity that you can by sourcing multiple provenances to get that. Whereas there's other places where we go, okay, we've identified a climate risk. So I guess how we do that is we sort of take different regions and we have these climate models and we say, okay, well, what percentage change are we looking at? And there's some areas like you brought up, Keith, that are not going to change, are going to change a much lower rate than other areas, which are big red flags. And I guess that's where we would prioritize. So it's not, I totally agree. It's not appropriate to do it everywhere. I think the first bit is that getting that maximum genetic diversity is appropriate everywhere. That would be something that I would say across the board. And we've done a little bit of modeling that shows that once you combine a few small populations together, kind of what you're capturing and the response of that population is just as good as from one large population. So I think I wouldn't be scared if you've got lots of little small ones or, mixing them together is a good strategy in the absence of knowing that we're dealing with fragmented landscapes. But really love your points. And I think it just comes down to having this risk framework and saying appropriate here, very, very cautious, think about it, maybe here to think about that risk about climate change. And then this one, well, we're already in the changes, or we've got degraded landscapes, or we're not in those very ancient parts, and then maybe that's appropriate as well. So again, not one size fits all or one place, one strategy fits all, but just making sure it's appropriate to where you are.
Yeah, it's really changed, if you pardon the pun, the landscape for simple tree planting projects, hasn't it?
It has.
The time was, oh, well, if it's a native of Australia, it can go here in the ground. And then we got a little bit wise and we said, well, it needs to be a native of Western Australia. Now it needs to be native of that particular soil type, that provenance. And now we're saying, we need to make some alteration here, but a sense of we need to do it slowly and we need to study it. And I get a feeling we'll be revisiting this conversation every year and having people sharing. We might look at, some sort of platform specific to one of our members or to one of our partners or to WALN itself to say, how can we, share what people are learning on a frequent basis in that sort of frank and fearless way for the betterment of the environment, to say, this is succeeding, this isn't. And Keith's point is a very salient one in a country with our extinction rate and our terrible feral populations that are contributing to that. Is plants are part of that feral issue, aren't they? So we do have to be so cautious. Bruce, have you got your tech up and firing and ready to rock it?
That's the idea, Jack. So let me have a go. Casey was very helpful, and let's see if this works. So share. It's looking hopeful my end, but nothing's come up yet.
Yep, looks good. Seedling quality in a drying climate.
Ah, good. Okay. So thank you to both Louise and Melinda for your kind words about this project, about seedling quality in a drying climate. And I say that particularly because I think what you've done is talked at a very high level. And I think that's a really important conversation. I tend to deal at the grassroots level, so I want to take everybody back to the grassroots level for a little while and look at seedling quality that I find when I go to nurseries. So this is specifically about dealing with nurseries it's about the kind of problems that I found, and I hope it'll give you a sense of what good seedlings look like. And that's what this photo is. And I said to one of the people who works at this nursery, gee, I'm always really impressed with your seedling quality. Why don't other nurseries do this? And the person said to me, because people don't demand good quality seedlings. They are happy with basically whatever the nurseries give them. So what I want to do today is to walk through some of the problems that I've run across with seedlings and talk perhaps about one or two of the answers. So looking at this first photo, what I want you to note is the very even size of all the seedlings and the good colour. They're not super lush, super green, because they've been over-fertilised or over-watered. They're just right. And the reason they're an even size is because they've been hedged to make them that size. So at the time when this nursery does its grading, it also hedges all the plants to 150 mils high. And that makes the seedlings much easier to deal with. And it also alters the ratio between the leaf area and the root volume, so that the leaf area isn't huge relative to a small root volume. Okay, woo. Now we need to go to the next slide and
just do that as you normally would. Just hit the arrow to take your, yeah.
I go page down and it doesn't happen. Sorry about this. I am not sure what to do.
Right. Well, we'll do what we did before. Case will give you a quick call. If you stop sharing the screen for a minute, Bruce, just go to the bottom and stop share.
Look, I'm an absolute novice at this. I can't even find how to stop sharing it.
Do you have an 8-year-old handy in your house? They know how to do all the technological things.
I have a 28-year-old in the house next door who is actually watching this, so she might come tearing over. But
good. Send her a text and say, come and give us a hand.
No, she's watching. Steffi, help.
While you're waiting for some assistance to arrive, I'd like to go to the audience and just ask if people want to jump in and say, is that new knowledge? It's actually, you know, I haven't done a huge amount of planting, but I've done some over the years. I was always sucked in by the greenest, lushest, tallest seedling, you know, and I suffered some losses, and I'm starting to understand why. And I never understood that hedging was a practice either. So that, what are they doing? They're taking that excess foliage and height off the seedling, Bruce, so that it's got better root quality?
Yes, that's right. Well, it's the ratio of the leaf area to the root size. In other words, if you've got a tiny root system and a huge leaf area, and you put that seedling into a dry place, the seedling is suddenly going from being watered once or twice a day into a dry soil. So it's never going to be, the small root area is never going to be able to supply a large leaf area with the amount of moisture that it was used to getting in the nursery. So what this nursery does is to reduce the leaf area, and apparently what it does is tends to make the trunk thicker where it comes out of the potting mix. So
do you have a sense, Bruce, of success rate difference? Like, are you talking a magnitude of different outcomes?
I haven't done the research work in the longer term on this. I'm working on this, because one of the other things is that the quality of seedlings varies hugely between nurseries. And I find that some nurseries have a very good quality like this one, whereas others have a quality. They will sell seedlings which are tiny. When you take them out of the cell, there's hardly enough root system there to hold on to all the potting mix, let alone be able to plant it successfully. Now, in the space I work in, when I work with kids, I've got to have robust seedlings, because the kids don't handle them gently. They just have a go, you know, oh, I'll pick up this seedling and throw it in the ground. So I've got to have good quality seedlings. Now, yes. Steffi is here and she's saved me.
Good on you, Steffi. Do not leave the building. Stay
Yes.
on hand, please.
Yes.
We need you for tech support.
Don't leave, Steffi. So, okay, so let's have a look at last. So we have some issues here. So let's deal with a really basic thing. When you're buying a seedling for a nursery, insist on only one seedling per pot or per cell, because here's a good example of what happens when you're planting into a dry situation. The seedling on the right of that photo has been planted in a really dry space. Now, how much moisture do you think that seedling would have had if there'd been two in that cell? I mean, I don't think either of them would have lived. So it's a really basic thing. Get your nursery to only sell you one seedling per pot or per cell. Incidentally, the plant on the right has been there in the ground for about 3 months, and it would have been planted last year near York in about the middle of July.
Right.
Okay, so let's go down again. So one seedling per cell. You can see on the left there are 4, and this is a species where it definitely needed to be thinned. The nursery here hasn't bothered to thin it. Now, the other thing it didn't do was plant them in the centre of the cell, and that's really important. Let's go down another one. Now, if you look at the seedling on the left, you can see that's a Hakea presei. You can see in the middle of the root system, the main root running down the right-hand side of that cell. Now, it has grown no roots out to the right at all. All the roots are growing over to the left. Now, this grows into a sort of a medium-sized tree. What you're setting this up for is to blow over, because it doesn't have any root development out to the right of that main seedling. So it's really important to get your nursery to plant them in the centre.
Yeah.
Let's look at the seedling on the right there. Now, that's an example of one which has a J root. It's not the best example, but you can see the main root goes down and then it goes off to the right and then it goes down to the bottom. And it is likely that that seedling was pricked out. And that means you take it out of one container and put it in another container to grow it on. Not a good nursery practice in my experience. Grow the seedling in the container that you're going to, it's always going to be in up till the time it was planted, because a J root like that one doesn't straighten out. It stays that way for life, and you end up strangling the seedling after a period of time. Okay, so another one of my pet things, this is the quality of seedlings from different nurseries, which I mentioned. So in this case, the seedlings on the left and the seedlings on the right are the same seed. I split them in half and gave them to 2 nurseries. And what you see there is an example of different nursery practice. Now, we've got to get the nursery practice for all nurseries up to the level of the ones on the right. Now, the other reason I put this slide in is cell trays versus forestry tubes. Now, the indications from the work I've done up to date are a seedling grown in a cell tray that's of better quality will be a better seedling than a poor quality one grown in a forestry tube. Let's have a quick look at this. This is a popper for popping seedlings, and that was for the tray on the right in the previous one. And that's what it does. It pushes little metal prongs up so that the seedlings are loose when you come to plant them. And this makes a huge difference. It means that for the tray on the right in this photo, you can grab 4 or 5 or half a dozen seedlings at a time and transfer them. The ones on the left, and I'm starting to hate these cell trays with a passion because they're long. Now you notice that there are no slots in the side of that, but they're long and narrow. And in my mind, that cell tray has been overwatered. Again, same seed lot, grown in different nurseries. See all the moss on the left, and on the right, we have a situation where there's virtually no moss and better quality seedlings. But here's why I think those cell trays on the right are awful, because you can't pop them. You've just got to lift the seedlings out. Yeah. So this is what the root systems look like if they're not properly developed. The very left photo is actually one of the seedlings out of that tray on the left. And you can see we've left half the root system behind. This photo in the middle, we've probably left about 75% of the root system in the tray because it's not been well enough developed. The nursery practice is not good enough to produce a robust root system. And the photo on the right, the only way I could show you what the root system looked like is to show you a seedling where there's 2 in the tray. But that gives you an idea of how much root system is missing from those 2 on the left. And that's why I hate those cell trays with a passion, because it gives you try and lift them out. You end up losing half the root system. The only way you can get them out, if they're not properly grown, is to poke each one out with a stick. If you're out there with a bunch of kids and you've got 4 hours to plant 4,000 seedlings, you don't want to be dealing with seedlings out of those cell trays.
I'm just conscious of time, Bruce. I don't want to lose people. And
I will be quick. That's what a good root system looks like. That's an overgrown root system. There's too much there. This is a plant where there is too much leaf area relative to the root system, which we were talking about before. Here's another example of that, again, with those seedling trays that I hate. And we probably should move on and look at what good seedlings look like. Oh, quick, before we leave, if you have very dense growth like that one, you end up with disease. And there's a couple of examples of disease on seedlings. Now, these are some good quality seedlings here. So go to your nursery and have a look. That's my daughter, Georgia, taking some photographs. And here's some very healthy middle-aged seedlings, which you might see around the place. Actually, I think Peter White's been in my computer. It's a gremlin, because what I'm supposed to be showing you is that photograph.
You're in trouble, Bruce Ivers.
Which not at all, it's Peter White's fault. And this is down at Lake Bride in one of his plantings. And I wanted to show you this because that's the end point. And you can see on the right, one of the eucalypts is starting to form the upper canopy, and that's lower canopy in the middle. So that's what you get with good seedlings. But unless you do that, and this is the nursery that was growing the good ones, and it's for sale. We do not want to lose the ability to the corporate knowledge to be able to produce good seedlings like that.
Thanks, Bruce. Can you get your daughter to stop screen share so we can get everybody back up?
Yes, good idea, Steph.
Wonderful.
What do we do? Stop screen share.
So I think what we've heard today is we certainly have, I've got a better understanding of the role of genetics, and we've got some agreement coming through the chat that an annual get together to swap what we're learning and what we're seeing is going to be really important going forward. Wow. But Bruce's very practical, grounded information is critical, because, you know, we've all been on those plant days where you see stuff that, you know, shouldn't go in the ground and it does, and stuff that gets wasted and stuff that's going to need too much TLC. We don't have that luxury anymore. You know, the climate challenge is going to be enough for us to have to compensate for, and therefore we've got to start with the best quality seedlings we can get. I wonder if there's anyone in the audience who's doing anything in the sort of seed pill or the, you know, breaking down the surfactant in the soil, doing any sort of different or additional moisture retention activities that they want to share with us before we wind up.
Jack, can I just jump in?
Sure.
Our friends at NAC NRM, Jana was just asking a question in the chat. In an already highly modified site, do you think that succession planting with the initial disturbance species is the best option? Does someone want to talk to that?
Yeah, look, that's what I've been doing is, and even it applies to home gardens. You've got the native legumes that we've got at our doorstep, and you know, using those has a big benefit. Like Keith was saying, if you do use outside of stuff from outside, like the Acacia saligna, that can cause a bit of an issue, but there is a role to play for me from like looking at the end point and then working out what are the legumes, what are those primary succession kind of plants that happen after a fire, and the flower colour too for pollination ecology. And the colours are usually a succession of chronology of yellows and then some purples and blue indigos, you know, violets, but the yellows are the stuff that comes on, and that's what insects, invertebrates can see, is less reds in the system because invertebrates don't see that. So looking at the small things and how the system actually runs naturally, it's about building up the small things to allow the big things to come through.
That's great.
Fantastic.
That's so interesting.
I think it's also one of those things, a great point about with the whole role of that successional planting model in like those nurse plants, those early species are able to sort of kickstart the whole system, increase the organic matter in the soil, which then is going to hold on to the water more and provide that environment for species to come after that. So we're a big advocate. Sometimes projects don't allow you to do that. It depends on the project, but that is by far, I think, the best ecological model to do this. I was wondering if I could quickly just let you know that just a research project that we have going with UWA, just to keep it on the radar, is that we deal with a lot of sites where the soils have low water holding capacity. So we know this, anyone who's sort of gone around parts of WA, the sandy soils, the other parts of the landscape. So we're actually trying to work with UWA to develop these little pellets, these kind of coir, based on coconut coir, which might have some beneficial microbes in them as well, which then people could use for revegetation restoration. And essentially all they're doing is increasing that water holding of the soil that we know is when you've got more variable rainfall coming, it makes better use of the rainfall that's available. So this is something we're going to be trialling in our plantings, and obviously we'll keep people in the loop if it's something that works, but that's where we're kind of thinking of that in the what else amendments, what other things do we need to add into these systems to help even out or make the most of when rainfall's coming, know that it is going to be more variable and less of it around in that planting window. As you know, things that other people were talking about Bruce was saying that it's all about those roots getting established. If we can just amend or do something at the start just to give them that ability just to take hold, and then they're off and racing from there.
Thank you, Melinda. Look, sorry, Louise, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add that there are some, probably seen as quite old-fashioned techniques as well that we should be still really looking at. And weed control is a really big one of those. So, how we actually make sure that the seedlings themselves are getting the water and we're controlling the weeds in a way, because over time, that really does make a big impact, and we might not want to go in. And I'm specifically speaking really to Jana's question, because, how do you deal with that in a carbon environment? And so the three things I would say that are really important for that are obviously the weed control, first and foremost. Secondly, the water harvesting, and then we've been utilizing direct seeding, having really good kind of results on that, because that kind of mimics that success. You kind of get a mimic of succession then to a certain extent. And so because they're quite right. If you're doing a carbon project, it's it's different from doing a restoration project, in that you've got methodologies and rules that you need to follow in order to do that. So just wanted to kind of add that in and answer Jana really.
Great. Keith, can I ask what you're referring to with your wariness? Like, there's some really interesting chat going on there, people, and you'll get a copy of that. You'll get access to it in the recording. But what's your wariness with the gels, Keith? Is that chemicals?
No, it's more that they're encouraging the plant maybe to do stuff it wouldn't do in the natural way of growing a root system and so on. I mean, I've seen good results, but it's been weird stuff where plantation companies have had to get everything in by June 30 to match their financial reports and so on. But I just, I'm a cautious person, contrary to popular opinion.
Well, there was nothing more disheartening either than seeing your seedlings take off because they've had a false good start. And then when they hit reality, you know, you've got them
Thank you.
failing at a higher rate.
And
If
that's
you
a
get
huge,
too much leaf material, sorry, Louise.
I was just saying that's a huge risk in carbon, because if you can get fooled into thinking you've got a very good early start, and actually your risk is pretty high, because, you know, it is a false early start, and we've seen many sort of plantations fail on that side. Again, though, quite often that's in that, you know, forced planting that Keith was just talking about, and where, you know, you're not planting a mixture of species, so you're not getting those ecosystem benefits. Sorry, Keith, I didn't.
Okay, look, I'm conscious we're over time. I agree with Melinda at the beginning. We could spend days talking about the different intricacies and approaches, and there's some great knowledge in the room. There's some more stuff happening in the chat, which is good to see. Joe Woodbridge from State NRM has said, lots going on. Can't find it again now. Joe, are you there? Did you want to share anything before you left? Oh, we've got to get a photo, people. Casey, we need to get everyone turn your cameras on, please, and we'll get a screenshot. Otherwise.
Yeah, so this is Joe Woodbridge from the State NRM program. There's some really good information there. So part of the reason I'm here is to find out a little bit more about what's happening on the ground out there, and to see if there's anything that we need to learn as the State NRM program, particularly for grants and our assessment processes. And so it was really useful hearing what people are facing. And there's certainly some information there to learn from moving forward, around water harvesting, and that fear of failure. We know there's been a lot more failure in terms of plant deaths in recent years, so it's good to know that, you know, some work is being done and some research on how to approach that. And it will be interesting to see whether different organisations have better strategies, even if they have increased costs. It's about value for money for investment from the grants program. So if you can demonstrate, and that's through monitoring, that you have a strategy through succession planting or some different techniques for getting things into the ground, or sourcing your seed, growing them on, those increased costs can be funded with justification. So it all comes down to the justification. So, you know, do your monitoring, do your background, find out what works for your little patch. So all good.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. Well, look, on behalf of everyone there, I'd like to say a great big thank you to Louise from Carbon Positive, to Bruce Ivers, our techno expert, who knows, thank God, a lot more about seeds than he does about Zoom meetings. And good on you, Steph, for being there to help him out. And Melinda for that wonderful taste of science. We want some more of that too. I'll give you the heads up to WALN members. We're looking at how to broker, and there's a question that came up in the chat. You know, how do we know where the nurseries are that are doing the good practices? I've started some conversations with some nurseries to see if we can get some sort of preferred provider arrangements or service level agreements going with our members, so that the nurseries really understand what our members are looking for to have successful outcomes, and they've got a continuous supply of good business. So we'll keep you posted on that. Any closing comments from anyone? Everybody's happy? Everyone's had a saying, nothing left to be said?
Do you want us to wave for the picture?
Yes, please. Okay, we've got 2 screens to shoot. Go, Case. Thank you very much. You'll get a follow-up email shortly, and you'll get a link to the recording. And our next Landcare section, I've been scribbling all over my notes, is coming up May the 30th, and is about the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act and its implication for land carers. So if that pertains to you, we'd love to see you there. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and happy planting. The rain's coming soon.
Sorry,
Bye.
everyone. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Hi, Melinda.
Yes.